The house on Elm Street was a silent witness to the horrors that unfolded within its walls. From the outside, it appeared to be a typical suburban home, but inside it was a prison for Lois, Linda, and Don. Wayne, the man who was supposed to be their protector, had instead become their tormentor. Wayne was a man of contradictions. To the outside world, he was a hardworking mechanic, a man who could fix anything with his hands. But at home, those same hands were instruments of pain. He ruled his household with an iron fist, and his belt was his scepter. Lois bore the brunt of his rage, her body a canvas of bruises and scars. She had long since stopped fighting back, her spirit broken by years of abuse. The intimacy they once shared had faded into a distant memory, replaced by a cold, unyielding silence. But Wayne's desires did not wane with the loss of his wife's affection. Instead, they festered, growing darker and more twisted. Late at night, after Lois had succumbed to an uneasy sleep and Don was buried in his schoolwork, Wayne would creep down the hallway to Linda's bedroom. The door would creak open, and Linda would lie still, her heart pounding in her chest, hoping that this time he would pass by. But he never did. Don knew. He had seen his father slip into Linda's room, had heard her muffled cries through the thin walls. He wanted to scream, to burst in and stop the nightmare, but fear held him back. Fear of his father. Fear of what would happen if he spoke out. So he stayed silent, the guilt eating away at him, turning him inward. He began to seek solace in the bottom of a bottle, in the haze of drugs that numbed the pain but could never erase it. Linda, once a bright and cheerful girl, became a shadow of her former self. The abuse she endured at the hands of her father left her broken, her sense of self-worth shattered. As she grew older, she sought out relationships that mirrored the only love she had ever known. Toxic, abusive, and destructive. She had 6 children, each one a product of her desperate search for something she could never find. But the cycle of abuse continued, and one by one, her children were taken from her. Lost and alone, she turned to drugs, hoping they would fill the void that had been carved into her soul. Don's hatred for his father grew with each passing day. He watched as his mother withered under Wayne's tyranny, as his sister's light was extinguished. He tried to escape, to find a life outside the walls of that house, but the scars ran too deep. He became an alcoholic, a drug addict, his life spiraling out of control. But amidst the chaos, he found love in the most unexpected place. A man named Leo, who saw through the pain and the anger to the wounded soul beneath. Wayne's death came suddenly, a heart attack that struck him down in the middle of the night. There was no mourning, no tears shed for the man who had caused so much pain. His funeral was a somber affair, attended by a handful of people who felt obligated to pay their respects. Lois sat in the front row, her face a mask of grief, though whether it was for Wayne or for the life she had lost, no one could say. Don and Leo stood at the back of the room, their eyes fixed on the coffin that held the man who had ruined their lives. As the service ended and the room began to empty, Don felt a surge of anger, a final act of defiance. He approached the coffin, his hands trembling as he reached for the watch on Wayne's cold, dead wrist. Leo watched in silence as Don slipped the watch into his pocket, a small victory in a lifetime of defeat. But their moment of triumph was short-lived. The police arrived, alerted by a suspicious funeral attendant. Don and Leo were arrested, their hands cuffed behind their backs as they were led away. Lois watched in stunned silence, her heart breaking all over again. As the police car pulled away, Lois's thoughts turned to Linda. She had hoped her daughter would come to the funeral, that they could finally begin to heal the wounds that had torn their family apart. But Linda was nowhere to be found. Unbeknownst to Lois, Linda was lying in a dingy apartment, her body ravaged by drugs, her life slipping away as her father's funeral took place. In the end, the shadows that had haunted the family for so long claimed them all. Wayne's legacy was one of pain and destruction, a cycle of abuse that continued to ripple through the lives of those he had left behind. And as the sun set on Elm Street, the house stood silent once more, a monument to the darkness that had consumed them all.